We're moving to the dialogue. Voy a seguir en español. Nos sentamos todos aquí mientras. El diálogo va a ser en inglés.
Es verdad, claro.
Pero ustedes pueden hacer preguntas en español o en inglés. Yo me encargo de hacer las traducciones. Y lo que vamos a hacer va a ser empezar primero con una situación de cómo se puede aplicar todo esto que hemos aprendido al caso de Valencia. Y después voy a hacer una pregunta a cada uno de los ponentes sobre sus intervenciones y lo que hemos hecho, para después abrir todas las preguntas al público. Vale. Okay, so we have heard about the evidence and the consequences of pollution. We have heard about how innovation can shape the green transition, how policy can actually alter our outcomes. We have heard about how we can deal with competing legal and fundamental rights, and how the legal system can actually help in this respect. We have heard about the value of natural spaces and natural ecosystems, and the role that fund managers can actually do in shaping the transition. And we have a very concrete problem. On the 29th of October 2024, this city and this region was hit by a cold drop, Adana, which was of dimensions that hadn't been seen for a very long time, and that had catastrophic consequences. The main consequence was the cost of life, 232 in the whole area, just 224 in the region, in the province of Valencia. Massive destruction of wealth, destruction in housing, 100,000 vehicles that were moved away by waters, 40,000 more or less that cannot be used, and endless numbers of businesses that are in dire straits in very difficult situations. The question here is, how can we learn, or what have we learned, and how can we advise a region like Valencia to try to make sure that first we can prevent these extreme events from happening again, and second, what can be done in order to make sure that we have a green transition that facilitates that this will never happen again, but it's also just, that leaves no one behind, and that is fair for businesses and for individuals here. So I'm going to start with Susana, who was the first to intervene. What have we learned from all the evidence about the need to act, and the need to act now, and how can we do it in a way that's fair for everyone?
Thank you, Andres. Well, I think while the focus of the green transition has been on mitigation, reducing CO2 emissions, we have lost that battle in terms of preventing flooding right now. It's too late. We're not going to, we're not attaining the climate targets that we committed to in Paris, in the Paris agreements. We are progressing, but we are progressing too slow. And so I think the focus needs to move towards adaptation. So this is happening right now. We don't have time to reduce our emissions and in 20 years' time see what happens. We have to focus on adaptation. So that's the first thing. And what kind of adaptation? So adaptation is not just technological and infrastructure adaptation, but it's also ecological adaptation and nature-based solutions. And it has to be a multidimensional type of approach that encompasses, well, these ecological solutions, infrastructure solutions, risk prevention, etc. So it's a variety of things. But focusing on the nature side of things, there are examples in other cities of how this has been addressed. And there's the concept of something called sponge cities, cities that are designed or retrofitted to absorb water and store that rainwater and then release it when there's no risk of flooding. There's many examples in China where they have done this because it's easier for them to do urban planning things. And so in Wuhan, Shenzhen and other cities, but also in LA and Seattle and other cities across the world, where they started to change, for example, the pavements, for the pavements to be permeable so that when it rains, the water infiltrates to the ground rather than just staying on the surface, creating green roofs to, again, better absorb the water, creating urban wetlands, creating gardens and parks that can flood, and then creating infrastructure under those gardens to absorb the water and store the water, the excessive water. So, you know, Valencia could potentially start investing in some of this infrastructure. So next time it rains excessively, it can better absorb the water and keep the water by investing in these nature-based and technological solutions. The problem goes back to finance. Who's going to fund this? It's very costly to retrofit an existing city to build these things in. But I think it's more likely that we are able to do that than combat this through reduction in emissions, which will take decades to have an effect.
Okay, thank you very much, Susana. That's actually very insightful. Teis, you have been involved very actively on green transition adaptation and processing in the case of Denmark, but the scenes we saw here in Valencia was a problem of lack of preparation, and after that was chaos and lack of coordination of the different administrations at the local level, between the local and the regional level, and between the local, the regional, and the national government. What would be your recommendations in order to prevent this sort of scenes and have clear strategies and clear plans that work in cases of emergencies?
So, of course, policy coordination is something that's hugely important when we deal with all these different wicked problems, and climate adaptation is clearly one of them, right? If you go to the literature, it's almost a little bit frustrating because everybody always talks about policy coordination, right? We need to break down these policy silos. We need to think across planning, agriculture, energy, health, etc., right? Everybody realizes that this is what is needed. Then if you actually look at what do we know about then mechanisms for actually achieving this coordination, the picture is, to be frank, not very satisfying, in the sense that we have many sort of single case studies of different ways of coordinating, but there's not really any kind of sort of consolidated knowledge about which coordination mechanisms actually work, right? So, you know, we have intergovernmental committees, we have placing civil servants in ministries that are sort of adjacent to the ministry that they're actually employed at, etc., right? So there are many different ways of trying to achieve this coordination, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So one of the things that actually do work is to make sure that civil servants, they have incentive structures for their own careers to actually engage in coordination activities. Because very often that's not the case. Very often you get promoted internally in the government organization you work in if you work well within the scope of that organization. And if you move somewhere else and you work with these people, that is actually something that could potentially be detrimental for your own career. So if we actually manage to create some incentive structures that facilitate the engagement of civil society, of civil servants in these kind of coordination activities, I think that would be a very great start.
Okay, I think that's a very good solution. Piera, you highlighted the problems of reconciling the right to having a green transition and a living planet, a good environment, with the right to work. Mm-hmm. How can labor law and legislation actually facilitate that we can achieve a transition that, as you were saying, citing documents from the European Union, that leaves no one behind? How can we square the circle using law as an instrument?
Yes, I can give you an example of, related to the Valencia case. Mm-hmm. After the...
It's pretty close up.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
or otherwise I will use it. Yeah.
You can use this one. I can put it over here.
No, I'll keep it. Yeah, after the Dana, of course, and after all this people who died and so on, in Spain, a Real Decreto Ley was approved, giving to workers a 4 days leave for climate crisis, which means that workers can take up to 4 days, and of course, you could have an extension when there is a climate crisis like the Valencian one, which means that they are paid. So if I refer to the description using the risk category, through this instrument, you do not, you eliminate for those workers the costs of the climate risk. So workers do not have to pay the cost of the risks, of the climate risks. And apart from that, when the climate crisis goes on, for example, then the dana lasts more than 4 days, let's make an example, then another mechanism could enter or related to the social security system. In Spain, the ERTE system, which means that workers stay at home, and they continue to be paid by the social security system. So it's a way of, transferring from workers the risk of the climate risk to the collectivity. And so labor law system in this case demonstrate that it could be helpful in this balancing of fundamental rights. I think. And another important thing is that unions, by this royal decree, are called to define protocols together with companies how to face this climate crisis, to define a procedure, a specific procedure. Unions, I repeat, they have an important role. And I just want to briefly answer to a question that someone from the audience asked me during the break. Don't you think, this person said, don't you think that in this case unions, like in Germany, should have a place in the boards of the company taking the decisions? Absolutely, I think that's the way to follow, because we need, first of all, we need informations from unions. And informations are essential to, assess the risks. One of the most important phases is assessing the risks. So we need informations, we need data. And unions, in many cases, are the only ones to produce this kind of data and information. So absolutely, I think that we should go towards the German system.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Now it's to Giles. And I think you drew the short straw, because I'm going to ask you the question that is probably more politically difficult here. Having said that, you being an outsider is probably the best capable of answering this question. You made a very compelling case for natural capital and the protection of natural ecosystems and the restoration of natural ecosystems. And in Spain, like in many parts of the world, there has been always a conflict between, should we try to restore natural ecosystems, or should we try to build something new or create a basic infrastructure to actually prevent, let's say, flash floods or other extreme events from happening? And of course, one of the main problems with the flash flood in Valencia was that for decades, if not for centuries, housing has been built and economic activity in floodplains. And it's not just a minor thing, to the extent that we have not just countless firms there, but around a minimum of 300,000 people living in those floodplains. How can we reconcile the idea that we need a natural capital that is valuable with the problem that for many, many years we have been destroying natural capital, and reverting that situation is very difficult, to say the least?
Okay, thank you for the difficult question. I'm glad you made a compelling case. I'm actually going to walk back a little bit, because I think it's actually incredibly important that we don't overpromise as well. I think we have to recognise that there is a chance of that. So yeah, I'd be the first person to say these nature-based solutions really should be explored, but we should not think that they are going to solve this issue. There's an example in mangroves, for example. We tend to think of mangroves, one of the first services they provide, flood attenuation, can prevent storm surges of sea. They are not going to protect communities from extreme flooding events. And I think it's similar in this context, that you will have disaster risk management experts that will say there is no solution where that amount of rain is not going to cause a significant problem. So it's probably doing you an injustice, but I sort of detected an element of what you were saying in the introduction, Andreas, where this is about reducing these risks to zero. It's unfortunately not going to be the case. So I think we need to recognise that yes, this is about increasing the resilience of our economies and society, but it's these events, alas, may happen. There still will be a chance, and this is where the adaptation element is so important. I mean, I was struck by the link to labour law and perhaps making it less of a difficult decision to go about your normal life because you've somehow got some labour protection. We tend to think about changing behaviour in terms of for the transition, how I use household energy, etc. But there's also adaptation in terms of how should I behave when faced with a risk like this. I mean, we know there are tragic instances of behaviour that was perfectly understandable, but that ended with fatality risks being increased as a result. So I wouldn't know how to behave in that situation. I mean, it feels like sort of education programs are actually a part of that as well. So I think there's a portfolio of things. I think the nature-based solutions are still part of that, but increasingly, I think actually the natural capital proponents are becoming more realistic, thinking about how do we blend that with the engineering solutions as well. So perhaps we get the best of all worlds. They're incredibly cost effective. They can be effective for the problem that you have, but also in combination, you could maybe get the what you might call the sweet spot of protection within that context, that extreme events may overwhelm systems as well, as much as you wouldn't want them to.
Thank you very much, Giles. And final question from my side to Pablo. What we saw after the Dana, the flash flood here in Valencia, was perhaps certain administrations that were stalling, but we also saw that many of the local entrepreneurs actually took action and actually reacted very, very quickly to the problems that were being faced by the people affected by the flash flood. How can you and in general fund managers contribute for this sort of processes to happen and not to become the exception but to become the norm?
It's not an easy one. I mean, from our side is, as a financial group, we did a lot since that happens, and we were completely committed with the population here, giving lines of credit to the small entrepreneurs, helping them, and trying to give them solutions. But from the fund managers, point of view, one specific thing is what you already mentioned is nature. I mean, one of the focus in our dialogue and our assessment is biodiversity and nature capital, in terms that we want to analyze in every single company that we are investing, how is the approach on this matter. Of course, measure or medirlo, the impact on the measure is very difficult, because when we are talking about emissions, it's pretty easy. Emissions are the same here than in Lima or in Peking. But the biodiversity or the specific situation here, talking about my own experience, I have a second residence here in Javea, and I'm planning to come that weekend, and nothing happens there. I I mean, I didn't go, but I knew I was because it was just specifically in a concrete, reduced location. So this is very important. I mean, all of the asset managers will have to, and inside in our company as well, in CaixaBank Asset Management and in CaixaBank, we are promoting and having a putting a lot of resources in order to understand how is nature and biodiversity works, to try to as well to talk to our participant and our clients, and other things as well. The education and it's very important. I mean, it's out of my probably responsibility here, but from my personal point of view, I lived in Florida a few years, and I had like 7 hurricanes, but in fact I just passed one Wilma. The other were warnings. Okay. Everybody went home when the hurricane, was in the news in Bahamas or in Mexico. The culture of the people over there and the Spanish people, they were like, ha, 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 we are laughing, okay, everybody's going home, but we're going to stay outside. No, you have to go by law. And the people understood that they have to follow the instructions. So what I'm saying, I had like 7 hurricanes, but in fact was just one hit seriously to my house. So of course, when we say, on Monday you always know the soccer or the football results during the weekend. Everybody talks after what happened. But I think, culture, education, but from the asset management point of view, we have to look at, biodiversity, nature, because we believe that emissions are already, I'm not saying that we learned 100% what is going on, but we are pretty, reaching some sort of comfort in terms, we know what is a footprint, how it works and everything. But biodiversity, in terms of measure, to know exactly to do the benchmark with the companies and everything is a completely challenge right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. You have had plenty of time to think about your questions. We have already a question there at the back. Please say your name and then...
Hi, my name is Irene Vivas. I work at Net Zero Cities, and my question is about insurance companies, because we see now that this is becoming an issue because we have more and more of these natural man-made catastrophes. So what kind of policy and regulatory changes do we need? Because in Spain, when you buy a home, you need to get a mortgage. You get a mortgage, you need to get insurance. But then we see in LA or even in Miami or in some very heat places in the world how insurance companies are starting to say we are not covering this. So what do we do?
Who wants to take it?
I can start as a lawyer, maybe. I'm not talking about, specific insurance for houses, but generally speaking, it's a theoretical issue that you raise, because normally risks can be let's say the most important, the first technique that you use. You have insurance. Risk. If there are risks, you can have an insurance from this risk. But when risks are of that, amplitude and they're so, well spread, then insurances refuse to insure risks. And then what is left? The other techniques that we are describing today, risk management techniques. When they refuse to insure, you just have risk management techniques, which means that you have to assess the risks, have information. The more information you have, the better. And then you have to try to, organizations, companies, the state, also the state, have to reduce the impact of these risks. And that's a way of distributing them. We will have more and more risk not insurable.
Okay, anyone else wants to contribute to that one? Now let's go to the next question then, over there. So Elena, and then we'll go.
Gracias, mi nombre es Elena Beunza y tengo una consultora de regeneración urbana y estamos participando en parte de planes de reconstrucción. Mi pregunta va para el profesor Rodríguez-Pose, o no podía ser de otra manera.
En teoría no tengo que participar.
Bueno, pues si quieres contestarla, Andrés, si no, el resto de la mesa. Soy exalumna de Andrés también, y él siempre explica cómo el desarrollo económico local va acompañado de muchas diferentes vertientes, que todas ellas juntas hacen que una región o una zona pues, pueda desarrollarse adecuadamente. Hemos hablado mucho de infraestructuras en esta mesa, pero me gustaría saber cuáles son, según vuestra consideración, los otros elementos indispensables y necesarios para que las zonas afectadas por la dana vuelvan a ser unas zonas con un adecuado crecimiento económico y con una estructura social, si no igual, quizás incluso mejor, aprovechar la oportunidad para que sean mejor de lo que existía antes. Gracias.
I'm going to translate. The question is about we've been talking about what is needed to promote economic development, especially after a natural disaster. The focus has been on physical infrastructure to a certain extent, but we know that physical infrastructure alone does not do the trick. That what are the other ingredients that are needed in order to make sure that in any recovery we can get economic activity going again, and an economic activity that is both sustainable and resilient. So who wants to take that one?
I mean, yeah, I can start. I mean, in terms of what's needed, so we talked about the hard engineering and hard infrastructure, but also about the ecological infrastructure, nature-based solutions which add to that. There was also mention of early warnings, which is a really important thing to prevent the damages so that people don't lose everything and then have to restart again. So the power of early warnings, that obviously in the US is much better than it is here. But also the risk mapping, updating the risk mapping of, for example, floodplains with climate projections. We have new climate projections, it's getting worse, so let's redo the mapping and to reduce the chances of houses being built in floodplains, that they become uninsurable. And if they are built on floodplains, then we could have engineering solutions. In the Netherlands, for example, they're building houses on piers, on stilts, that so they're not straight on the ground. So there are solutions, even if you build in those areas, but you have to plan in advance and you have to know which areas are those. So that's another consideration. And then there's a behavioral change as well. There's a whole element of behavioral change that happened here in Valencia, people helping each other, and there's lessons to be learned on how to do that better in the future. So yes, it is a multifaceted approach.
Anyone else? No? Question over there.
Alberto López, soy profesor jubilado. Sí, ¿cómo podemos evitar las catástrofes como la dana? En Europa no solamente se da la dana, se ha dado la dana aquí en Valencia, se ha dado en la Vega Baja, hace muy poco. Hemos visto también la zona del río A en Flandes, en Francia, y hemos visto también la costa francesa en el Canal de la Mancha. Por lo tanto, todo esto va a ocurrir. Va a ocurrir porque en el Canal de la Mancha una gran cantidad de tierra está cayendo al mar, el mar se está tomando una gran cantidad de tierra y algunas casas pues también se van al suelo. La pregunta es que hay un balance entre el capital natural y el capital de reconstrucción. Por lo tanto, aquí hay un balance entre dos cosas. Por lo tanto, hay que elegir. Hay que elegir si invertimos en capital de reconstrucción antes de que ocurra o después para reconstruir. Por lo tanto, este capital es lo importante de tal manera que las administraciones previamente, si queremos evitar las catástrofes, tengan que hacer esa inversión. Okay. Si está previsto y de qué manera.
Well, muchas gracias. I think this one is for Giles, mostly. It's about reconciling natural capital with, let's say, reconstruction activities. He was saying that there's a big problem that extreme phenomena, weather phenomena, are going to happen, and they're happening more frequently. It was not just here. It has been flash floods elsewhere. There had been issues of coastal erosion on the English Channel affecting northern France, etc. So how do we balance, and I think you more or less addressed that, but in a different way, the idea that do we build for prevention, engineering works beforehand? Do we build for reconstruction? And what is the role in between of natural capital and the return to natural habitats and where do they fit?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to approach an answer. I mean, I suppose in the case of flooding risks, there's two issues. One is the future. You know, where do we build? And the other is, well, actually, we've already built, and people are living with risk. And not only are they, do we have increased exposure to those risks, but also those risks are increasing as well. So I think there's different dimensions to the problem in terms of how we might respond to it. I mean, I do see a lot of scope for combining the engineering approaches with natural-based solutions. I mean, I suppose any good engineer is essentially overcautious, will over-engineer their response, and this seems to be a sort of a good element of with regards to that. I think that, a key issue is the finance for it. So. On the one hand, it's about creating, what funds can we raise for this? But actually, your challenge is even more than that. It's about, if I'm providing money, actually, I want a return. It's not just funds I'm providing for someone to spend wisely. And I think there is a lot of activity going on to try to respond to that. I mean, the one I mentioned earlier in terms of funding and where that might come from. In the England context with that biodiversity net gain policy, I mean, there is a potential solution to a housing problem. We don't build enough houses in England, and when we do, we build them on floodplains because other bits of land are restricted. Trying to build more houses, it has an implication for biodiversity, but developers are actually making a lot of money from property because they're earning quite large rents because of the scarcity of housing. Some of those rents that they're earning essentially now is going to have to be put into biodiversity investments elsewhere, and it just really makes sense to try and combine that, not just with restoring our nature depletion, but actually where it can provide ecosystem services, which is essentially the bit of nature which benefits us. I mean, there's reasons for investing in biodiversity over and above that. So I think it's a case of thinking more strategically. Yeah, a big prize would be, I don't know if you have a similar institution in Spain, but in the UK we have a national infrastructure board. I think they're called. For many years, people have been trying to get natural capital as considered to be part of the infrastructure, because then that board would have to essentially account for the state of nature in the country. But that's been a long, hard argument that hasn't been won yet. But I think sometimes it's just getting into the policy landscape and embedding these concepts. That's why natural capital accounting is actually so important as well, because it's providing that part of that statistical landscape and then making decision makers accountable for what's happening revealed by those statistics. It's a long process, so I suppose that's all I would say as well. How much time do we have is the key thing as well.
More questions? Yes, please.
Muy buenas. Mi nombre es Rafael Gómez Galindo. Me acabo de jubilar hace 3 o 4 años y he sido 47 funcionario de la Administración del Estado. Mi pregunta creo que va más relacionada con la señora italiana, porque yo también... ¿Perdón?
Cerdeña. De Cerdeña.
De Cerdeña, sí. Cagliari, yo me acuerdo cuando era joven que había un equipo de fútbol y había un jugador que creo que se llamaba Riva, que era muy bueno. Perdóneme. Perdóneme la broma. Bien, mi pregunta va en relación con su título, según he escrito yo, que era el equilibrio entre el empleo y la transición verde. Yo provengo de una zona que no está en la provincia de Valencia, está un poco más al norte, pero que en este momento hay un tema que es objeto de mucha controversia y que está enfrentando a mucha gente dedicada a la agricultura. Se trata de, o viene relacionado con los paneles solares. Con las torres no hay problema. Con los paneles solares la cuestión es que las empresas que los instalan buscan los terrenos más llanos, que son los campos, superficies enormes, que en este momento están dando una producción y están dando un empleo a la gente, por otra parte, en una zona que se está despoblando, que se está convirtiendo o se va a convertir pronto en un desierto. Entonces, mi pregunta es si usted cree que sea el Estado, sea la autoridad de la comunidad autónoma, sea quien sea, deberían regular eso y evitar que, concretamente, la zona en la que yo estoy pensando, hay una gran superficie de montaña rocosa, que por tanto no se puede cultivar, ningún tipo de cultivos, ni de arbolado, ni de nada, es una pura roca, pero es muy llana. Y entonces la gente, los que están en contra de eso, pues piensan que las deberían de instalar allí, no en los campos que hoy en día están siendo, pues producen.
Claro, claro.
Bueno, let me just translate and then you can go ahead, because I think it's
por la respuesta.
The question by Gerardo is fundamentally about land use conflict. So he comes from a part of the region that is not in the province of Valencia, just right to the north, which is mostly dependent on agriculture, and it's a very rich agricultural land, and now there's pressure to install solar panels. He said that wind turbines are not a problem, there's solar panels in that case, and those firms are looking for the most fertile agricultural land. And of course that's creating conflict, because that's an area that is producing high yields and generating significant employment, when nearby in the mountains there's relatively flat land, which would be, according to him, suitable for solar panels, but is not being used and no one wants to go there. So how can we reconcile all this? So Piera, you go ahead.
Yes, of course, it's a very important question, a very relevant question. The technique should be balance again. How do we balance the climate risks? Because of course the justification for installing, solar panels and wind turbines is the green transition. We have green energy and so on, but then we have to take into account what are the impacts on population and what is the impact on employment and so on. It seems that these solar panels they do not create problems on employment, or better maybe they create problems on the employment in agriculture, but then they have more employment in the solar panel sector. I don't know, but anyway, in my opinion, what it should be avoided is the dictatorship of the climate or the carbon neutrality. Absolutely, it has to be avoided. Remember what I said, there isn't any fundamental right that should be a tyrant to another fundamental right. So it's essential to find a balance. And how to find a balance? First of all, trying to involve in the discussion the population, the stakeholders. All decisions should be taken, using different perspectives. And in my opinion, is what is happening now in Sardinia. I have a similar case. In Sardinia is a very windy region, and so apparently we are one of the best regions where to install wind turbines. But wind turbines, first of all, do not create employment. Absolutely. There are researches demonstrating that the employment rate in that sector is very low. But it's, of course, for the companies installing wind turbines, it's, they make a lot of money. And in Sardinia, now the problem is that these wind turbines, let's say, there is a conflict with another fundamental right, we should say, the right of the landscape right, because nature is also landscape. And a region, like imagine in many cases Spain, counting on tourism, which creates employment, cannot have these huge, I don't know, how do you consider them? In many cases they are, of course, they say, oh, but in Denmark we have a lot of them, they're not horrible. Well, it depends on in which cases you have these wind turbines. No, but I know that in many cases this is the answer. The issue is we have to balance all these fundamental rights, and we have to enhance the democratic processes, and we have to involve, we have to find space of political discussion and decisions. It's not only up to the parliament in Madrid to decide the destiny of your region in I don't remember where.
In Valencia.
In Valencia, yes, somewhere. Or in Sardinia. We have to I mean, the population have to have a say on that.
Teis wanting to intervene, so...
I have to correct you, they create a lot of employment in Denmark at least, right? Yeah, no, I mean the ones that you put up in Sardinia, they create jobs in Denmark, right?
So, yeah. You come to Sardinia and you install your things that you have built in Denmark.
So we are happy with that. I just wanted to make a comment on the solar versus agriculture, because this is an interesting thing. Of course, there are specific places where we really have trade-offs, in the sense that either it's solar PV or it's agriculture. But at the same time, we also know from statistics that so far the land cover taken by solar panels is still relatively small, right? I mean, it's not that it's nothing, but it's still quite marginal on the big scale. At least if you compare to all the attention that it gets, right? So the land conflict is, in my opinion, a bit exaggerated compared to where we are today. And then, of course, we also have agrivoltaics coming forward here. So in not too long, probably they will live side by side, the two uses. Yeah.
Susana.
Yeah, on that, there's something called NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. So everyone thinks, of course, we need renewable energy, but not in my backyard, because I don't want these things here. So we need to think what is the best way to locate these facilities. And we have to look at the costs and the benefits of each region, and it will have to go somewhere. And if someone in the region, if we locate a region where the costs, the benefits outweigh the costs, then it can go there. But what can we do for the local people? Compensation. So in Japan, they have nuclear power plants. No one wants a nuclear power plant in their backyard, but they get compensation. They get lower house prices, free energy, etc., etc. So there is a scheme that could be a win-win for the region if some of the profits of these facilities were distributed for the people who suffer the facilities in their backyard. So there are solutions that I think can work for the benefit of all.
Okay, just before I pass to Piera, because she wants to go back, and I don't know whether there are other people there, but you'll be amazed, in Spain they're phasing out nuclear plants, and people close to a nuclear plant, they want to keep the nuclear plants. Yeah. So, Charles.
Okay, thank you. No, it's just a quick thing. It was interesting to know about, well, maybe the solar agriculture land conflict is not quite as significant as we might think, but clearly it's significant for some people. And I think actually this land conflict issue, it is an issue with more generally with regards to nature-based responses that we have. Quite a lot of the nature restoration policies that we might have may well impose large opportunity costs on people, and how we deal with that is really important. It goes back to the just transitions and what's fair.
Piera, you wanted to say something briefly?
Yes, about the NIMBY principle. This is a very crucial issue in Sardinia as far as, wind turbines. But how do you calculate this when, for example, the decision is taken by a village? Yes, I accept that wind turbines are put in my land, but then, of course, the thing is that, and you have also compensations. Oh, some villages are becoming, in Sicily, it's a huge question, because some villages are becoming rich because they have compensations. But the thing is that the negative effects of the wind turbines are not on the villages accepting to be put in their lands, but they're in the neighbor villages, because because the landscape is totally altered. So I see them. I cannot, convince tourists to come here because there is this huge turbine. So I mean, you have to define precisely the backyard.
Okay, this is a hot topic. Teis, last intervention.
Conversation
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't hold back now, but this is... We wrote a book on wind energy policies in the Nordic countries 2 years ago, Denmark, Sweden, Norway and Finland. Really interesting. Denmark, Norway, Sweden, all three faces increasing resistance from local populations towards wind turbines. Right? Finland, the opposite. Why is that? Well, no. The reason in Finland is basically that a large share of the profit from the wind turbines goes into the local municipalities, right? And this means that all the municipalities that are towards the border with Russia and that cannot put up wind turbines because of the military radars, right, that are being disturbed by the wind turbines, they are really, really angry and they want compensation for not being able to put up wind turbines, right? So this shows something about that, if we actually create the right conditions, then it is actually possible to get some relatively fast diffusion of these renewable technologies.
Okay, we are beyond the time, but I cannot resist to ask a quick question, the same question to all participants, which is going to be quick question and 30-second answer. If you were now to be called after what has been heard here by the government of Spain or the government of Valencia or the local municipalities you choose, about what do you do to make sure that extreme events like this one, the Dana, do not happen again? What would be your first point of advice? And let's start your first line, your main piece of advice.
How about clear answer? Less politician and more professional and technicians on...
Just the microphone's a bit...
Here. Okay, I will go for less politician on the emergency, decisions, and more professional and technicians in charge of the crisis.
Okay, Giles, please.
Okay, I suppose I'll just go back to my space of comfort, which is the natural capital accounting. I would probably say something, because I'm sure other people would say other things. We need some statistical landscape in order to make good decisions. This is not just a technocratic response, but it is actually part of the picture. And I think if we had good regional natural capital accounts, it would be a great complement to other things we could do.
Yeah.
I think that we need new institutions. So I would launch the idea that we need, like, the national board of something that you say, natural board. I would propose to have a new institution composed by, technicians, representative of the region, of the states, stakeholders like unions. Let's have this like the main issue to be discussed. Let's find these solutions. I'm not here to give solution, but I think that procedure in this case, decision procedure, are very important.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Teis.
Yeah. Okay. So in brief, I think many of the challenges we face now, they're new. So we need new ways of doing policy making. Right. So in Denmark, we just got a CO2 tax on agriculture, the first in the world. And that happened because the government locked up the agricultural lobby, nature, restoration, NGOs, industry and labor organizations in a room for a couple of weeks, and they came out with this compromise that was then voted through in Parliament subsequently. So we need to think about new ways of doing policy making to deal with these new challenges.
And famous last word, Susana?
Well, I go back to what I said initially. I think we need radical new solutions that can be scaled up for the whole of the city, and that's transforming Valencia in a sponge city. Creating the infrastructure that could be nature-based solutions and physical infrastructure that means that the water can be absorbed and can be stored underground and then released at a later date. And there's a number of solutions to that, and people in charge of the city should look at funding to be able to start building these infrastructure and these nature-based solutions.
Okay, so we can leave it there with Valencia as the sponge city, and we can take it from here. Quiero agradecer a todos, primero sobre todo a los ponentes, porque yo creo que han sido 5 intervenciones de muy alto calibre y un debate muy interesante, así que les quiero que los agradezcan con un aplauso. Agradecerles a todos ustedes por haber venido en números tan grandes, por haberse mantenido en una jornada que ha sido muy intensa, porque no hemos tenido prácticamente ninguna pausa, más que la pausa para el café. Les emplazo para que vuelvan el año que viene, busquen en abril o en mayo, tendremos sobre un nuevo tema, que seguramente estamos discutiendo si es la crisis de la vivienda, pero puede haber otros temas. Estén atentos. Y si se pasan por Londres, no duden en visitarnos. En el Centro Cañada Blanch, lo que estamos haciendo, tenemos actividades públicas muy frecuentes, sobre todo durante el periodo electivo, en el que traemos pues, personas de este calibre, del mundo científico, del mundo real, de la empresa, del mundo de las finanzas. Sorry about that, but yes, I'm part of your world, so it's del mundo real, pero también tenemos gente que toma decisiones de muy alto nivel. Este año hemos tenido a Teresa Rivera, tuvimos a Pablo Hernández de Cos, hemos tenido a Nadia Calviño, hemos tenido a varias comisarias europeas, como Elisa Ferreira. En este sentido, tenemos un montón de actividades. Y no quisiera acabar sin agradecer a nuestros sponsors, fundamentalmente a la Fundación Cañada Blanch, que nos sigue apoyando y nos ha estado apoyando durante 32 años, a CaixaBank, que también nos está apoyando en los últimos foros y que nos ofrece esta sede tan magnífica, a la London School of Economics, que nos apoya, y a la nueva Global School of Sustainability de la London School of Economics, que seguramente va a tener un futuro muy importante en intentar solucionar muchos de los problemas y muchas de las preguntas que ustedes han planteado. Muchísimas gracias y hasta la próxima.